Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, October 31st around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about that big-time game over there in Happy Valley. We'll get into Ohio State at Penn State in the very first segment. Going to be a huge one, and definitely one that Ohio State very badly needs, and we'll get into that first. Then we'll get into a couple other Big Ten games. We'll jump into Oregon at Michigan, Indiana at Michigan State, a couple of undefeated teams that are going on the road in the state of Michigan. Could get a little bit sketchy for those two. Definitely want to break those down. Then we'll get into the AP Top 11s. Weirdly, this kind of grouped together pretty nicely. We'll get to Texas Tech, Iowa State, as well as Louisville heading over to Clemson for a huge ACC matchup. See if Clemson's that real team that we've seen the last couple of weeks, or more towards that team we saw in week 1. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams in the country. We'll just break down what I want to see from them. Less about schematics, but a little bit about that. More about just the energy of that team going into this weekend. And then we'll finish it. We'll do a little bit of a whip around to all the other games. We'll talk about that Ole Miss-Arkansas game. Very, very interesting one as Ole Miss gets ready for that huge matchup against Georgia. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can add click on that $ first, add any question, comment you'd like. Your name and question will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive as we head down what is going to be a crazy November, but want to let you guys have your say in the show, so utilize that whenever you would like. And also the GSMCpodcast.net page is up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those you'd like to use, please do. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing because it is a huge one over there in Happy Valley this upcoming weekend, and there is a ton at stake in this one because you have a Penn State team, undefeated, playing really, really good football, ranked above Ohio State going into this game, not favored, but is ranked above them, and is in a position where if they're going to beat them, this might be the year to do it. There is so much of an opening for them to possibly knock off Ohio State in this game. The Ohio State offensive line is in a really weird place, and Penn State has the problem behind the offensive line. Who's going to start at quarterback is a huge question in this game, but for Ohio State, you need that run game. You're not going to win a title. You're not going to do the things that you pretty much have to do this year if you don't get that run game going. So that offensive line needs to start getting pushed. They need to start getting a little bit more creative, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But Penn State allows a little under 200 yards passing per game. It's got to be the ground game. It's got to be finding a way to get Travion Henderson, get Quinshon Judkins going, and if it's not, then Penn State's probably going to be able to take advantage of a couple of Will Howard mistakes, and this one's going to get ugly in a hurry. But on the other side, I think Penn State's kind of a confusing team because you look forward to this upcoming weekend. You could have Bo Pribula, who is played really, really good football, no doubt about that, and I think he would be more than fine. I technically think they could win with both quarterbacks. The question I have is, what is the approach with each quarterback? You know, if it's Drew Aller walking out there, are they going to attack this back end a little bit more? Are they going to try to push the ball downfield? Assume that would be the way that it would go if Pribula was in there. I don't know what it would be with Aller because the Ohio State back end has shown to have some openings in it. Can you take advantage of those, and do you want Drew Aller in the game if you're going to take advantage of those? So it's one of those things that, depending on which quarterback lines up under center, you could have an entirely different game plan. You know, you have this pro-style, very polished, stand-up quarterback like Drew Aller, and then you kind of have that Trace McSorley 2.0 and Bo Pribula, a very talented, very run-oriented player, still can make the passes that he needs to make, but maybe not against a back end as talented as Ohio State. So whichever quarterback trots out there first for Penn State will probably tell you a lot about the plan going into this game for Penn State, and then we'll see how long the leash is, one way or the other. With a lot of the injuries, we'll see how close to 100% Drew Aller is. A lot of things going into this game for Penn State at the position where you'd rather not have a question going into this game, to be totally fair, but regardless of what happens on the quarterback position for Penn State and the Ohio State offensive line, this game is about defense. It is going to be about defense, and it's going to be about the run game in particular. Both defenses are top 6 in the country in rush defense. Both are top 30 rush offenses. So they're going to get after each other. It's going to be one of those games where if you get down into the red zone and can't turn it into 7, you turn it into 3, you might have a problem on your hands because you have another team coming back the other way with probably the two best running back duos in the country in this game. They could just walk down the field, score a touchdown, and then you're in a really tough spot. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I know Penn State fans badly wanted this one at night. Not getting it there is definitely very tough. Obviously, we have a little bit more juice in that building if it was at 8 p.m. instead of at noon. But at the end of the day, they're going to be ready to roll for this game. I have no doubt about that. People will adjust their sleeping schedules, probably starting today, to find a way to get up early, get ready to roll, and excuse me, probably get a little too hydrated, quote unquote, and then hit into the stadium and get crazy, no doubt about that. But for the CFP, as bad as Ohio State needs this win, there's so many different things that go into this, and for the CFP, Ohio State pretty much needs to win this one. Now, I do think a 10-2 Ohio State, if they run the rest of the way, Penn State, Oregon meet in the Big Ten title and they move on, I think they'd get in. I have very little doubt about that. I don't necessarily think that's too much up for debate just because they're Ohio State. We know how good they are. But at the end of the day, you have 2 losses heading into that Indiana game, not where you want to be by any means. And if you're Penn State, you win this game, you move on to the Big Ten title, you're firmly in a position to either get that 4, 3, or probably 2 seed, to be fair. You're in favor to get maybe that 1 or 2 seed, and then if you don't get that, you're getting that 5 or 6 seed, which we've talked about on here. I don't think is better than the 1 or 2 seed, but it's pretty close. It's definitely one that you're going to be in a really good position for, so this is everything for Penn State. And we'll talk about it more tomorrow when we break down the team and pressure, or the coach under the most pressure, but at the end of the day, this one's going to be special. It's going to be right up there with Alabama, Georgia, right up there with Georgia, Texas. The athletes on this field are going to be otherworldly. I think there'll probably be at least about 20 NFL players that play on Saturday, and probably more than that. It's absolutely ridiculous, the amount of talent on either sideline, and we'll see which one can get it done. But a couple of players to watch, got a little ahead of myself, but TreVeyon Henderson is someone that just has to have a big game for Ohio State, mostly because when you look at Quinshon Judkins, fantastic player, no doubt about that. What he loves to do is get downhill. He loves to run inside zone, he loves to run duo, and find a way to get downhill and then make guys miss that way. TreVeyon Henderson's a little bit more of a dynamic back. I'm not saying that Quinshon Judkins isn't capable of that. They both will have to play a part in this. But TreVeyon Henderson, a little bit more of that receiving back, a little bit more of that back that you can toss the ball to, get him on the outside, and hopefully make a play in space on an outside zone or on a pitch play or something like that. And I think that puts them in a much better position against a defensive line that should be able to eat up your offensive line. So they're going to have to get a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, just get him the ball out in space, whether that's a pitch or a screen or what have you. He's going to have to get the ball in space because then he can make some really special things happen, and you don't necessarily have to create an offense outside of this offensive line. You just have to get the ball to your playmaker and let him go make a play. And then on the defensive side, Sonny Styles is massive in this game because he's going to get the assignment that every linebacker in the country is terrified to get right about now, which is guarding Tyler Warren. He is going to be on that man, I don't want to say most of the snaps, but plenty of them. He is used to be a DB, is now a linebacker, is a little bit more physical, but also has that cover ability. He might be one of the best players in the country at guarding this player. I don't know if he has enough to do it, at least for the entire 4 quarters. Tyler Warren is such a tough guard. He's such a physical, tough player that can go up and make athletic plays. It's going to be a matchup that's going to be one to watch. If they keep Tyler Warren out of this game, at least mostly, there's almost no chance that Penn State's able to get this one done. And then you got Harrison Wallace, a pass catcher for Penn State that started the year incredibly fast. He looked like he was going to be a runaway wide receiver 1, was going to lead this team in yards pretty much every single week. Didn't end up happening. He's taken a little bit of a step back, still a very talented player. And when you look at this game with Ohio State, when you have so many incredible athletes all over the field for Ohio State, the only way you're going to be able to beat them is stress them in a number of different directions. The only way you're going to be able to beat them is make them think about all 11 guys on the field. They can't just be thinking about Tyler Warren and the 2 running backs. They can't just be thinking about the quarterback in the backfield. You have to find a way to get Harrison Wallace going, to get Omari Evans going, to get Julian Fleming going. You have to be able to stretch out this defense, or they're going to be able to key in on your run game and Tyler Warren, and you're not going to have a shot. And then you got Danny Dennis Sutton, a really ridiculous defensive tackle for Penn State. And when you talk about this Ohio State team, the problems are up front. If you can find a way to get to this quarterback, if you can find a way to blow up this run game the same way that Nebraska did, you have the talent on offense to win that game where Nebraska didn't. So it's going to be a really fascinating game, and Danny Dennis Sutton is going to have plenty to say about this game on Saturday. But moving on to keys of the game, I think for Ohio State, you got to find the quarterback run game. You're not going to get out of this game just running downhill, inside, outside zone, and hoping that your offensive line is going to handle this defensive line. it is a very tough defensive line. What you're going to have to do is make sure that they can't just immediately start moving forward. They have to sit there, think for a second, make sure that Will Howard does not have the ball, and then they can attack, because that totally changes the equation. Even if it's a half a second that you're keeping those guys standing still, you're winning that down. So you have to find the quarterback run game. You have to get just creative in the run in general, because this D-line is going to, at least for the most of the night, is going to beat your offensive line. You have to find a way to get out on the edge, make these defensive linemen confused, and not let them just impose their will pretty much all day. And then you got to trust your back end. I think you look at this Penn State team, they have the ability to stretch the ball downfield. Drew Aller obviously has that passing ability. Thing is, these wide receivers are not going to stress you the same way Oregon's are. They absolutely can find plays downfield, but I don't necessarily think you have to outright, drop a ton of guys in coverage to stop that. I think you trust your guys on the back end, stop the run first, top priority, and then say, if this quarterback's going to beat us with 40-yard throws, so be it. But at the end of the day, I do think this back end's going to be more than fine handling these DBs, and then the front end just got to do their job against the run. And then finally, play out from in front, because you're going into a really, really tough atmosphere. You're going into an atmosphere with a lot of quarterback questions, a lot of fans that understand the history of this game. If you give them a reason to quit on this game early, they might just. You might just have a little ability to take a little bit of juice out of that crowd, and then you're running away with this game. So get out in front, score that first touchdown, take first blood, and then be out there and have Penn State players and fans all alike, and James Franklin likely, questioning if this is the same exact thing that they've seen the last couple of years. And then you got to go over to Penn State, and I think the biggest thing is trust your QBs. You have very, very talented players at quarterback, although they're very different players. Drew Aller and Bo Peribla are very, very talented guys, and both can go win you this game. They can't win you this game if you are calling this game very conservatively. They can't win this game if you're just going to run the ball and then take a couple of shots from time to time. You got to unleash these guys. As scary of a thought as that is, you sometimes just have to unleash guys, because there's no world where Penn State doesn't win this if their quarterback is not making plays downfield with his arm. So they're going to have to make plays. They're going to have to be able to really go out there and kind of rip it. Can't do that if you don't give them the play calls to perform that. So definitely going to be something to watch. I think you just got to trust whatever guy you're trotting out there and let the game plan be the game plan. And then get the crowd involved early. I just talked about it. This crowd wants a win. They understand the rivalry and the history of this game. It could very well be that you lose them very early on. You have to get them involved early. You have to go out there, try to score early, try to score first, and then this crowd's going to get involved, and then it's going to be an outright nightmare for Will Howard to deal with. And then keep these wide receivers in front. That's really just the reality for pretty much everyone that plays Ohio State. This run game is very, very good, and it's definitely something you're going to have to worry about. Your defensive line is really talented. They should have the ability to win that matchup against the O-line. Your job is to avoid the big plays. Your job is to make Ohio State earn every single down that they get, and then at some point, you got to assume Will Howard throwing into tight windows is going to make a mistake. It might not come very easily, but it's probably going to come at some point, and then that might be all the opening that you need. But it's going to be an incredible game. Cannot wait for this one to break down, but I like Ohio State. I'm going with my gut on this one. I've talked myself in and out of this pick about a million different times, but I'm just going to go with the team that I think needs it more. I think they have their back up against the wall. I think they're going to be ready to roll, and for whatever reason, Ryan Day is able to get it done against Penn State and just about no one else. So I'll take Ohio State. I feel pretty good about that pick. I do think it's going to be a really back and forth, very weird game, and whoever comes out of it firmly on their way to the Big Ten title, possibly against the team that we're about to talk about here in a second, or both the teams that we're about to talk about here in a second. We'll get into Oregon at Michigan as well as Indiana at Michigan State right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose if it's some loose shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that huge game going on in Happy Valley this upcoming weekend. Ohio State, Penn State, going to be a huge one. I do think Ohio State gets it done. I think it's going to be a really fun back and forth game, but I think Ohio State wins it. I think they continue moving on to a possible Big Ten title, but they still got one of these teams ahead. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch this. I apologize. I got a little bit of mix-up on my captions here. It is Indiana, Michigan State, the second one that we're breaking down. Really apologize for that. A little bit of a typo from myself. But let's get into these games, and we'll start with Oregon. We'll get into that Michigan-Oregon game, and then we'll get into Indiana, Michigan State. But at the end of the day, this is a huge game for Oregon. They're in a really, really interesting position as they move forward because all the games in front of them, they should be able to win. They should be able to win relatively convincingly. They are the better team on the field on Saturday, no doubt about it, and they probably will be the rest of the way. It's going to be really interesting to see just how they handle all this. It is a new world for a lot of these Oregon players. It's a new world for Dan Lanning where that number one is next to your name. So you're going to have to handle it one way or the other. You're going to play a really, really tough team, and it's going to be really interesting to see how this unfolds. The thing about Michigan is they're coming off a Michigan State game where, although the extracurriculars after the game were a little bit upsetting, they got some pretty good quarterback play. The quarterback play was far from upsetting, which is a very new thing out there. I believe Davis Warren went 13 for 19, didn't make a pick, had a touchdown, passed for over 100 yards. You're not going to get a lot from your quarterback. As long as it's mistake-free football, you have to feel pretty good if you're Michigan, and you have an ability to possibly be able to win this game. It comes down to Michigan's O-line and Oregon's D-line. That's the way that a lot of Michigan games have gone thus far this year, and that's probably the way that everyone will go the rest of the year because they're going to run the ball. They're going to have to find a way to get Khalil Mullings and Donovan Edwards moving downhill, and this is really more than anything about Oregon just kind of handling their business. Not a game that I thought I would be saying that in, but at the end of the day, this is a team that you're better than. This is a team that does not necessarily have an offense to speak of. You should be able to walk in there, get a comfortable win the same way Texas did earlier in the season, and then move on your merry way. But it's definitely one that if Michigan is able to get their run game going, could get a little bit sketchy. Definitely one to watch, but a couple of players to watch. I think Evan Stewart is going to be a really interesting player in this game because he kind of got going in that Ohio State game and has kind of kept it up through the last couple of weeks. Very, very talented player. One of those guys that the second that they were able to unlock him, it was going to be a much more dangerous offense. And you look at this Michigan back end, there's not a lot of guys outside Will Johnson, and I'm not even sure if he's going to go this weekend. So it's definitely something to watch where it might just be too much on the outside, and Evan Stewart will be a main reason for that. And then Jamari Caldwell, a big guy in the middle of that Oregon defense. He is a huge player for this game because Khalil Mullings, when he hits you really hard. Now, if you're 320 pounds, you can probably take that hit a little bit better and give it back to him just a little bit. So I think Jamari Caldwell's huge in this game just to give the energy back to Michigan. A lot of the times, especially over the last couple of years, but even in this year alone, there have been times where Michigan's just been able to say, we are stronger, we are bigger than you. This is not one of those games, and Jamari Caldwell is going to be one of those guys that kind of proves that point to Michigan. Then you got Samaj Morgan. This is a guy that I just, for the life of me, cannot figure out why he is not a bigger part of this Michigan offense. I think he is such a talented player. I think he has the speed that you absolutely need in this offense because you're not necessarily going to get a huge amount of gains in these big explosive plays that you're going to need in a game like this if you don't find a way to get the ball to your playmakers. I understand Colston Loveland is one of the best tight ends in the country. He's also not going to out-sprint anyone. He's also not necessarily going to run for 70 yards downfield and make that one big play to totally change this game. Samaj Morgan might, and you have to be able to get this guy the ball on jet sweeps, on end arounds. Just get him the ball in space and allow what happens to happen. I understand you have your formula, but you need to get your playmakers the ball in space, and this is a guy that can really change a game in a hurry. And we talked about that back end. Jair Hill is going to be a huge player to watch on that back end if Will Johnson goes or doesn't go, because there's too many wide receivers on that back end to just have, or on that side for Oregon to just have one player on the back end that's ready to go every single week. He has to continue to step up, has started to play a little bit better football throughout the year, but definitely needs to continue it and probably take it to another level in this game. The keys to the game for me, I think Oregon's mentality is probably something that we're going to have to watch pretty much for the rest of the year. It is always very, very tough every single week that you're playing as the number one team in the country, as you're playing as the team that is hunted by a lot of people. It is going to be something that they're going to have to handle week over week, and they're going to have to fight complacency week over week. And it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold, and I think this is one of those games where your toughness is going to be tested, your will is going to be tested, and your mentality is going to be tested. We'll find out how tough this Oregon team is, at least comparison to this Michigan team on Saturday. Going to be fascinating to watch that. And then you got to make the most of your possessions. This is not going to be an up and down game. No game that Michigan plays does or is, but at the end of the day, you have to find a way to get 7 points, to get, when you get in the red zone especially, find a way to get 7 points. Both run games are very, very effective, but also both D-lines are very solid. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, who can get those couple of stops, who can force 3 points when 7 is really what you need, and possibly make the margin that cannot be made up in this game. And then Michigan's back end, no doubt about it. They have to play probably the best game that they've played all year, because this is the biggest challenge that they've faced since they faced off against Texas in week 2, and they did not look good in that game. They're allowing over 220 yards through the air per game, and that's not very good for a Michigan defense that has a ton of dudes on that back end, but just has not been able to put it together. So it's going to be a fight for Michigan. They're going to have to find a way to scratch and claw and try to find a way to win this game, because it could kind of flip your season on its head and give a lot of those fans a little bit better of a feeling about this year and going forward especially, but I think Oregon's just going to be too much. There's going to be too many big plays. There's going to be too many wide receivers running deep over the middle of the field, and I think it's one of those things where Michigan probably plays pretty good football, probably keeps it relatively close, but ends up not being able to make the plays that they need to make, and Oregon makes those couple of explosive plays that change the game. So I do have Oregon to win that one. I have them win it relatively comfortably. Maybe it's a little bit close in the second half, but Oregon's able to pull away, get a 2-touchdown win, and continue moving on their way to a possible Big Ten title. And then we got another team that has their eyes set on the Big Ten title. Apologies for the caption again, but it is Indiana-Michigan State. A huge game over there in East Lansing this upcoming weekend, and Indiana favored by a little bit over a touchdown. It looks like Curtis Work is going to go in this game. Still something that's a little bit up in the air. We will update you on all of the injury updates tomorrow, but definitely going to be something to watch. And this is a huge moment for this Indiana team. They're coming off a game where they just badly needed to get a win over Washington, and they were able to do it. Now they head into another game that is a little bit of an upset alert against a team that is not necessarily playing elite football by any means, but Aiden Childs has started to come along for that Michigan State team. The run game is very interesting with Nick Carter as well as Lynch Adams. There's definitely some players, Nick Marsh on the outside, going to be some problems for this Indiana defense to deal with. Maybe Michigan State can make something happen, but overall for Indiana, after this game, Michigan and Ohio State wait the next 2 weeks, and it's definitely a stretch that if you can find a way to go 2-1 in, I think you should be in the playoff. Now, there's still some question around that. We'll get into all the craziness tomorrow about the playoff hypotheticals and who would go where, but as of right now, I think you're looking forward to those 2 games. You got to make sure you take care of business here, and it'll be really interesting to see what Curtis Work has in this game, how much ability he has, how close to 100% he is, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But some players to watch, I think Omar Cooper, very talented wide receiver for Indiana. Definitely a guy that definitely can stretch this Michigan State defense. And I think you look at this Indiana offense, especially with Curtis Work not necessarily being at 100%, they're going to lean on the run game, no doubt about that. But you have those couple of playmakers on the outside, Cooper as well as Elijah Surratt, that absolutely can change this game. And I think probably going to have to at some point. Because if you're Michigan State, you're probably just selling out to stop the run and then living with what happens on the back end. And then you got Aiden Fisher, a very talented linebacker for Indiana, one of those guys that you look at this run game with Aiden Childs that can possibly get on the outside and make you hurt with his legs. You obviously have Nate Carter. You obviously have Lynch Adams. You have really talented players on the other side. You need a guy in the center of that defense to just make plays. He doesn't necessarily have to be spectacular. He doesn't have to be all over the field. He does have to make sure that if he has that one-on-one with Aiden Childs out in space, that he gets him on the ground. If he can't get him on the ground, then maybe Michigan State can make those 1 or 2 plays that they need to make in this game, those explosive plays that totally change this one in the second. And then on the other side, Monterey Foster Jr. is a huge player for Michigan State in this game. Aiden Childs has become a little bit more confident throwing the ball downfield. He definitely, obviously, has a guy in Nick Marsh that's going to be a problem for a long time to come in the Big Ten for opposing defenses. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to find another guy. You're going to have to find a guy that is not being guarded by D'Angelo Pons, frankly, because this dude is an absolute monster, and I definitely think he could make those couple of plays that you're going to need in this game. But for the defense, it's probably even more important. Malik Spencer is a very interesting player, kind of plays that linebacker safety kind of hybrid, a little bit more in the box linebacker, but definitely a player that's hugely important because if you're going to be able to stop the run, if you're going to be able to pin everything in and make sure that your back end can handle the wide receivers, but you're not necessarily lending help there, your linebackers are going to have to play really good football. You know, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 linebackers in the box, they're going to have to make plays, and they're going to have to get these running backs on the ground and make sure that they don't open up the holes on the back end that they possibly could, because you come a little bit too far down in the box, then you got a problem, and then they can hit you over top, and then you got a really, really big issue where Indiana's up 14 before you even know it. So you got to be able to stop the run in this game, and if they're going to do that, it really just comes down to these linebackers flying around and making all types of plays. And then you got keys to the game. I think that Indiana quarterback situation, no doubt about it, is going to be really, really interesting because this Michigan State pass defense is very good. They're allowing only 200 yards per game. Another reason why you should probably just trust your back end and sell out to stop the run gives you an ability to possibly find a balance between this craziness that is the Indiana offense. But the big question for Curtis Rourke is, how close to 100% is he? Is he going to be able to push the ball downfield, and are they going to have to run the ball a little bit more aggressively? Is he so far from 100% that at the end of the first quarter we see Taven Jackson back out there? It's going to be really interesting to watch, and definitely something that will have a lot to do with the outcome of this game. But who wins the run game is definitely very interesting as well, because both teams are going to lean on it. Indiana is a little bit better at running the ball, averaging a little bit more than 50 yards more per game than Michigan State does, but Nate Carter, Kyron Lynch Adams have every ability to carry Michigan State to a little bit of an upset here, and definitely would be really, really fun to watch, but you're really just going to have to watch those running backs. If whichever group can get going a little bit better, probably is going to be the duo that ends up winning this one. And then Michigan State's desperation. At some point, you got to get the big win. At some point, Jonathan Smith is going to look for that win that gets this fan base ignited, gets them excited for 2025. This would be the one to do it. Maybe that back against the wall mentality, maybe a little bit of that desperation can turn into a little bit of an upset here. But I do think Indiana gets it done. I think this is a little bit of an interesting game. I think Michigan State does a really good job early in this game, possibly stopping a little bit of the Indiana offense, but I think it gets going in the second half. And I think Aiden Childs makes his fair share of plays, but not necessarily enough to win this one. So I am going to go with Indiana. They stay alive. They keep that undefeated season going and possibly set up an undefeated matchup with undefeated for them matchup with Ohio State in a couple of weeks. So definitely will be interesting to watch that. But let's take our second break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about the number 11 teams in the country. We got to talk about Iowa State and Clemson, and we'll talk about their matchups right after this. So stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about a couple of big-time Big Ten matchups. We got Oregon, Michigan, as well as Indiana, Michigan State. A couple of undefeated teams out there that are just trying to stay undefeated. Oh, excuse me. I do think they both will definitely be something to watch, where could have a couple of upset alerts out there. Definitely something that will be interesting and definitely will shake up the Big Ten in a hurry. But let's get into those top 11 matchups because there are a couple of really interesting ones here that definitely will have a lot to do with their conference matchups and could have plenty to do with what the CFP looks like at the end of the day. But we'll start with that Texas Tech-Iowa State game, a huge one out there in Ames, Iowa, where Iowa State's just looking to get to the end of the season. They're looking to be 11-0 when they walk into that Kansas State game because you do that, you're putting yourself in a very, very good spot. Now, you're in a really weird spot with the playoff where 11-1 in the Big 12 might not be enough, which sounds insane, but it might be the reality that you're staring down. But at the end of the day, you're in a position where you're undefeated, you're heading towards a Big 12 title. You just got to handle business against a team that is kind of sinking right now. Texas Tech has lost 2 straight. They have nearly bowed out of the Big 12 race. Actually, they should have been in the segment yesterday for the CFP with Virginia Tech because they technically still have a mathematical way that they can make the CFP. Now, I wouldn't bet on that by any means, but definitely something to keep your eye out on. Maybe Texas Tech has a little bit of a rabbit to pull out of their hat, but definitely will be something to watch. I think for this game, they're going to have to run the ball. That's just the way that they're going to have to go about business. Now, they're not necessarily going up against a team that is all that good at stopping the run. Iowa State is 88th in the country, 188 yards given up per game on the ground. So they definitely is something that you should be able to lean on in this game, especially with someone like Taj Brooks who is nearing 1,000 yards on the season. You should have an ability to run the ball, to keep this thing close, to slow down this game, and then possibly make those couple of plays. And then on the other side, you got an Iowa State defense that's 3rd in the country in pass. It's going to be an absolute nightmare. Somewhat that is to do with scheduling, but at the end of the day, they get tons of takeaways. They don't allow a ton through the air. If Texas Tech, which they like to pass, which is the funny thing about this game, where Texas Tech really likes to pass, Iowa State is worse against the run. Iowa State really likes to run the ball. Texas Tech is worse against the pass. So it's going to be interesting to see how these offensive coaches kind of approach this. But on the other side, the Penn State pass defense just has to play really good football. You have 2 wide receivers coming up that are absolute problems to deal with. And if you let them get free, then this could be the game where Rocco Beck just goes crazy and puts up insane numbers, kind of like Max Brosmer did a week ago at Minnesota, Maryland. Definitely something to watch here. But a couple of players to watch. I just think you have to get Abu Sama going if you want this Iowa State offense to really get off the ground. I think it's a very, very dangerous offense. It has a ton of very talented players. Those 2 wide receivers are incredible. If they're the only guys that are really scaring defenses, then you have a little bit of a problem. Now, they have plenty of running backs. They have guys that can get it done. I think Abu Sama is just the best athlete of the group. I think he has the ability to get out on the edge, make a couple of plays, had 89 total yards against UCF. He can be that 3rd down back that totally changes this team and gives them those couple of plays in this game that they're going to need on 3rd down, on 3rd and long, whatever that is. I think it's a very, very talented player and definitely one that could kind of just kick this offense up a little bit of a notch. And then you got Rylan Barnes, a linebacker for Iowa State, a freshman, very, very talented player, 3 tackles for loss against UCF, and one of those guys that absolutely can make every single play you possibly want him to. He is all over the field. He's going to be someone against this Texas Tech team where you're going to have to get Taj Brooks on the ground, and it is not an easy thing to do. Your linebackers are going to have to play really good football, and Rylan Barnes, probably main among them, is going to have to play really, really good football. And then you got Coy Eakin on the other side. When you talk about this Texas Tech team, they're going to like to throw the ball because they got about 4 wide receivers that can be absolute problems for you, Coy Eakin being one of them. Nearly 400 yards this year, a little bit more of that deep passing threat, a little bit more explosive than a couple of the other players on this team. And I think he gives this team a little bit more to deal with. You know, you have Caleb Douglas. You have... why am I blanking on his name? Josh Kelly, excuse me. You have Micah Hudson. You have guys that are going to cause problems for defenses. Having another guy on the outside that can just run deep and catch that big-time play is going to be a game changer in a game like this where you're going to need to make a couple of plays that don't make a ton of sense, that just kind of happen, that you just get a little bit of bounce of ball or you make that couple of plays downfield, whatever it is. Texas Tech has to make a couple of plays that don't make much sense in this game, and Coy Eakin absolutely will be at the center of all of that. And then you got CJ Baskerville on the back end of this Texas Tech defense, 3 INTs on the year. We talked about these wide receivers. They're going to be absolute nightmares to deal with, and that means those safeties are going to have to make big-time plays in the back end, have to get a couple of picks. He's got 3 on the year, so definitely something to watch as we head into this game because if this pass offense gets going, it's going to be really, really hard to stop. But Moving on to keys to the game, Iowa State's run defense is massive in this one. They're going to have to find a way to stop Taj Brooks, who has 925 yards this year. It's one of those guys, kind of like R.J. Harvey over at UCF. He can make you hurt, and he can totally take over a game if you're not careful. So you're going to have to be very, very vigilant in this game, whether it's dropping a ton of guys into the box and making sure you stop the run or playing a little bit of a hybrid. I don't know, because they're a pass-heavy offense. But as of right now, I think Texas Tech's going to have to ride Taj Brooks to a win here, and if they don't, then things could get interesting in a hurry. And then you do have the Texas Tech quarterback situation. Barron Morton looks like he is going to get the start in this one. How close to 100% is he? Do we see Will Hammond in this game? And if we do, will it be something different? Will it be a totally different offense, or will they run kind of the same thing? Definitely something to watch, because Barron Morton obviously a little bit more comfortable running this offense. I think Will Hammond is more than capable of making a number of those big-time plays that you're going to need in this game. But another thing is the clash of styles. We talked about it earlier. Iowa State is a run-first team, running the ball about 57% of the time. Texas Tech, 54% pass. So a little bit of a diatribe there, and definitely going to just come down to who can execute at a higher level, and we talked about it. Texas Tech is actually susceptible to the pass. Iowa State susceptible to the run. Who can kind of adapt to the weaknesses of their opponent and make those plays where they're maybe not quite as comfortable making those plays, whether it's Texas Tech on the ground or Iowa State through the air. But for me, I think Iowa State sends a message in this game. I think it's a lot like that Minnesota-Maryland game, not obviously in terms of the quality of team, but I do think Max Brosmer took full advantage of the opening that he had against that pass defense. I think Rocco Beck does the exact same thing in this game. I think he totally dominates them, probably goes for over 300 yards, and really puts on a show in this game. Excuse me, I apologize. Having a little bit of a throat problem today, but let's get into Louisville at Clemson, because this is a very interesting game. Clemson favored by a little bit more than 10 points, and definitely going to be a very interesting game for Clemson in particular, because you haven't necessarily played that big-time game, at least since Georgia. You haven't played that game that everyone can point to and say, that is a good team because they beat this person. That is a good team because they beat Miami, because they beat Louisville, because they beat, Syracuse or whoever it is this year. And they got a couple coming up against Virginia Tech and Pitt. So this will be handled. But at the end of the day, you're going to want to know how good this team is. You're going to want to know how real this team is, and definitely something to watch for this game. But for Louisville, you're pretty much out of the CFP race. There's almost no chance, mathematically even, that you get into the ACC title and found your way into the CFP. That being said, being able to spoil the fun for the team that actually is leaving your conference, or at least trying to leave, would be very fun, and definitely something that Louisville fans want to do. So going to be fascinating to watch this one. The Clemson offense is very, very balanced. They've done a really good job of just kind of getting everyone involved, getting the run game going with Phil Maffa, and then finding those receivers deep over the field. Antonio Williams has been remarkable this year, but overall, this is going to be the biggest test, and it's definitely going to be one that Louisville is going to pass the ball on you. They're going to push the ball downfield. It's going to be an interesting one where the Clemson offense has to just execute the way they've been executing. The Clemson defense might have to play a little bit better than they have in the last couple of games, because if they get beat a couple of times early, this thing could get interesting in a hurry, because this Clemson offense, although they are very, very good, we don't necessarily know what they look like coming from behind. We don't necessarily know what they look like when their backs are against the wall just a little bit. Maybe it opens a couple of doors for Louisville to win this game. But some players to watch. Bryant Wesco is such a problem on the outside for Clemson. He was out for a couple of games. I believe he will be back for this one, but 23.8 yards per catch. He is going to beat you deep. He has all the speed in the world. Definitely is someone that can cause problems for you, and I think for this Louisville team that is going to get up and down, is going to make at least a couple of plays downfield, you're going to have to find a way to kind of match that. You're going to have to find a way to make those couple of plays right after they did, and then take the little bit of the wind out of their sails. And I think Bryant Wesco is definitely going to be the guy they're targeting to do that. And then you got Avion Terrell. He has 7 pass breakups on the year, 2 INTs, a remarkable player, the brother of Why am I blanking on that? But the brother of A.J. Terrell, very talented player on the outside. And you look at this Louisville offense, he's going to get Ja'Cory Brooks a ton in this game. And he's going to get him going deep a ton in this game. Can he handle it? Is he, conditioned enough to handle that for 4 quarters? If he's not, then those couple of plays could sneak through. Then you got Isaac Brown on the other side, a very talented freshman running back for Louisville. We talk about the pass game, and we will talk about it. It's definitely something that you're going to watch for this game. Louisville's going to have to slow it down at some point. They're going to have to be able to find a balance in this game, and if they can't, then Clemson's going to be able to just kind of sit back and then pick off those deep balls pretty much whenever they want. You got to be able to suck a couple of those guys down to the box like an RJ Mickens on that back end and then throw over top of them. Definitely going to be something to watch, and I think Isaac Brown definitely has the capability to kind of take over this game in a way. And then you got to get something from Ashton Galati. He's a very talented player. He's a player that can totally take over this game. He has not this year. He has not been the player that they needed him to be, really this entire defense. But Ashton as well has definitely been someone that they're going to need to step up in this game. They're going to need to really eat up that run game if they're going to have really any shot in this one. And Galati's got to be at the very center of that. But moving forward to the keys of the game, because the biggest one we talked about it a second ago. Can Louisville find a balance on offense? Can they find a way to get that run game going? Because they're 10th in the country in pass yards per game. That's all well and good. When you're playing a defense like Clemson that has all of the defenders that they do on the back end, you're going to have to find a way to pull them in. You're not just going to beat them because you have the ability to throw downfield. You're going to have to beat them by kind of scheming this up and kind of baiting them and doing different things in the run game that then gives you the openings in the pass game that you're going to need. And then you got the Clemson. Are they 100% real? Do we feel good about this Clemson team going forward, or are they a team that played Georgia, got dominated, and then has not played necessarily a big-time opponent since? It'll be something that is definitely really interesting to watch. I tend to believe that they're real, but at the end of the day, that could all come crashing down in a hurry on Saturday. And then explosives. We've talked about it time and again during this segment, but it is going to be the way that this game is decided. Whether Louisville can hit or not hit those plays are going to be the difference in this one, and frankly, I think it's going to be really hard to hit the number of plays that they're going to need to in this game. I think that Louisville defense is all over the place, does not necessarily have much of an identity, and if you don't have an identity against this Clemson team, you're going to get torn to pieces. So I am going to go Clemson in that one. I'm going to bet on both those 11 seeded teams to get those wins, move on, continue on their way to possibly a conference title, but definitely something to watch this upcoming weekend. But let's take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about those top 10 teams in the country and just what do we need to see from them this upcoming weekend. We'll break it down right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of big-time matchups, Texas Tech, Iowa State, as well as Louisville, Clemson. I do think that both 11 seeds, actually, both 11 ranked teams, are going to get the wins in those games. Iowa State and Clemson continue on their way to a possible conference title, and that brings me to the question that Anthony has here. We are going to get into all the scenarios. I believe tomorrow I'll jump into all of the conference championship scenarios and then try to break down the playoff hypotheticals because there are a lot of them. Maybe I'll wait a little bit longer to get to the playoff hypotheticals and just get into the conference championship hypotheticals this upcoming, or tomorrow really, because the ACC is confusing. The SEC has a wild thing that could happen, but a lot of those things we will break down tomorrow. I can promise you that, Anthony, because I'm about as confused as you are. I can promise you that. But let's jump into the top 10 this upcoming weekend, and we just got to see a lot of different things from these teams. We got to see a lot of different people step up and maybe a couple of units play a little bit better football than they have thus far. But let's start with that game that we picked a little bit earlier. Oregon at Michigan, definitely going to be a huge game for Oregon. And I think they go on the road for the second time in Big Ten play. First time was to Purdue. And no disrespect to West Lafayette, not necessarily the same place as the Big House. It's going to be a big-time battle. Can they handle this momentum? Can they handle a team that is plenty physical on the other side, wanting to get after this team? You know, this is not a game necessarily that I think Oregon was betting on Michigan to be the team that they should just go in and handle by 2 touchdowns and move on with their day. I think they were expecting a fight, and they still very well might get it. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing for me is Dylan Gabriel. He has been able to show up essentially every single game this year for Oregon. He has been a little bit shaky to start, but has really come on throughout the Big Ten schedule. can he look the way that Quinn Ewers looked against this Michigan back end? Because the reality is he's going to have to look that way. If they're going to want to win a national title at some point, they're going to go up against defenses that are going to be absolute problems to deal with. It's going to be absolutely incredible to watch this one unfold, and if they can't push the ball downfield, if they can't get those explosive plays, this becomes a game that Michigan really likes to play. And then that kind of brings me to the other part. This is a game where Michigan's going to play physically. That's what they do. That's the only real way they're going to be able to win this game. Meet them there. Meet them at the level that they were, because you did it against Ohio State. It was remarkably impressive that they walked out on that field, and Oregon looked like the aggressor in that situation. Be that same person. Be that team that walks out on that field and says, we know you're physical. We know you're a team that can push others around. You're not pushing us around. Do the same thing that Texas did. Really, if Oregon can follow the Texas script in this game, they have to feel really good about what they're doing going forward. And Anthony, I think it is one of those games where you can have a pretty crazy outcome here, and it could totally shake up the college football world. I mean, I talked about it yesterday. Feels like this weekend's just a little bit too quiet. This one would make it quite loud in a hurry, that is for sure. And then we got that Georgia-Florida game. We picked this one yesterday, picked Georgia to win this one pretty comfortably, but definitely going to be an interesting thing for Georgia. They're coming off, a bye after a game in Texas where they just dominated. They looked like the Georgia team that we have kind of been waiting for all year. Thing is, we got to see it one more time. We got to see that consistency continue throughout the season. But the biggest thing that I want to see is just a balanced offense. I want to see an offense that runs the ball, that is able to get a little bit of a run game going. Doesn't have to be spectacular, but say 3.5 yards per carry. They're able to find a couple of plays downfield. They're able to not have a couple of drops. They're able to, not see turnovers from Carson Beck. Just play a clean game offensively. You're going to win this game by about 2 scores. There's almost no doubt in my mind. The thing is, Carson Beck and this offense have not necessarily played clean football. They've not necessarily played together football, even in that Texas game. So you're going to have to find a way to get that going, and if you can, it's going to be an absolute nightmare. And then with that, you got to find the run game. You got to be able to find the run game in this game. And frankly, if they can't the rest of the season, this is going to be a team that goes right back to being disappointing. It's going to be really, really interesting in this game. But I do think Tate Ratledge coming back to this offensive line, that's like jump starting a Lamborghini, like putting a rocket launcher on a Lamborghini, because you have these incredible running backs. Now you got one of the best interior offensive linemen in the country. So I would love to see 150 on the ground in this game from Georgia, if they're going to be able to get it done. But as Anthony said here, it could get ugly in a hurry. This Georgia team could just absolutely dominate the day, and very much apologize, having tons of trouble with my voice today. But this Georgia team could just totally dominate the day. Trevor Etienne could get a little bit of that revenge that he's out for, but maybe those Florida players are a little bit motivated for this rematch. But it's going to be fascinating to watch this one unfold. I think for Georgia, it's just about playing a clean game offensively. I think your defense is going to do its thing. You're going to have to be able to take care of the ball and just run the ball more than anything else. And then we'll go to the big game. Ohio State, Penn State, we picked it earlier. I am going to go with Ohio State. So what do I need to see from Ohio State this upcoming weekend? I think the biggest thing here is just the thing here is the thing that's all over every single college football show you've seen as they've broken down this game. This offensive line needs to play great football. There's no two ways about that. There's no way that they can play even okay football and be able to win this game, because your running backs need room. They're going to have to be able to make plays downfield. They're going to have to be able to get this run game going, because Will Howard, without a run game, is not a great quarterback. He's a solid quarterback and was able to step up to the plate in that Nebraska game, so not taking anything away from him. But against this Penn State defense, if you cannot get that run game going, if this offensive line is getting eaten up all day, it's going to be a nightmare for Ohio State. So they don't have to be necessarily perfect. They're going to have to play really good football and a whole lot better than they did last week. And then on the other side, just avoid explosive. I don't necessarily think this Penn State team offense is going to necessarily be able to just grind out drives against you. I think they have the ability to. I think Penn State is one of those teams that is very versatile. They can make a number of plays on the ground and through the air. It's not necessarily saying that if they're not making explosive plays, they're not winning this game. It is to say that this Ohio State team, if you're able to make those explosive plays, is going to be able to kind of unravel just a little bit. I think you could get them kind of on their back heel. So if you're Ohio State, you got to make sure that doesn't happen. You got to make sure you keep everything in front of you, avoid those explosives, and then just make them earn everything. And then finally, I want to see Will Howard be the guy. I want to see Will Howard step up to the plate, totally take over this game, and take what the comments that he had earlier in the week use those. Use everything that you have. It's a little bit crazy. It's one of those things that you never fully understand, but whatever motivation that you need to go into this game and win, take it. And I definitely think it's something that could help Will Howard in this game. It's going to be fascinating to watch this one unfold. And then on the other side, I think that you have a huge thing for Penn State this upcoming weekend because you have not beaten this team in a very, very long time. So the first thing is strictly just the mentality as you head into this game, because the reality is it is very easy for this Penn State team to just lose when Ohio State walks off the bus, because the reality is it's happened quite a few times in the past. It's happened where it just feels like from the second that game starts, no matter what the score is, no matter the circumstances of that game, Ohio State's going to find a way to win. Penn State's got to walk into here just unafraid. Walk into here like you are a team that absolutely can win this game, because you are a team that can absolutely win this game. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch this one unfold, and I think the play calling is another fascinating thing here, because you're going to have to deal with a ton of different things with Andy Kotelnick. You're going to have to deal with a ton of different things with that quarterback situation. How do they go about this? How do they find the openings in this Ohio State defense? And if they can't find the openings in this Ohio State defense, how does the defense on the other side respond? It's going to be really interesting to watch that, but how Andy Kotelnick handles the play calling and the quarterback situation, depending on the play calling one way or the other, is going to be really interesting to watch and definitely could just outright decide this game. And then finally, the last thing I'm looking for, I think, goes back to the first thing. This D-line needs to spell blood in the water. They need to understand that they are probably the biggest mismatch on that field when it comes to the Penn State D-line against the Ohio State O-line. That's probably the one that they can really exploit, that can outright take over this game, quote unquote. And I definitely think they just need to walk out there and dominate. They need to walk out there and just really just go to work on this Ohio State offensive line, kind of take over the way that JTT was able to a couple of years ago and say, this is our game. We are going to take over from the D-line and say, you're not going to be able to run the ball. And if that happens, then Penn State's going to win this game. As Anthony said, probably going to be a pretty low-scoring, pretty one-possession type game. Whoever makes those couple of defensive plays could be the team that gets it, and that D-line for Penn State is raring to make those plays. Moving on to that Miami game against Duke. We talked about it in the upset alert segment. Not super worried about this one, but definitely one to watch with a couple of the worries that Duke has, or a couple of the worry that Miami has, and a couple of the great things that Duke does. But the big thing that I want to see here is I want this back end to be a little bit locked down on Saturday. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can allow a couple of big-time plays, but the reality is the only way that Duke is going to be able to win this game is if Malik Murphy is able to unleash the ball downfield, make a couple of those 60, 70-yard passes, and totally change this game in a hurry. That is really the only way that Duke is going to be able to go about this. So stay back, be able to play a little bit off coverage, not necessarily do anything incredible, but also make sure that your back end is playing really good football, because you're going to go up against Clemson probably in a couple of weeks. Obviously getting a little bit ahead of myself, but definitely something to watch there. If that does happen, you're going to go up against a back end, or you're going to go up against wide receivers, that are going to cause problems for your back end. You have to be able to step up to this challenge if you're going to be able to step up to that one. And then on the other side, it's Heisman winning time. I understand, you don't want to stat pad, you don't want to push too much energy towards Cam Ward, but you're a 20-point favorite. You should have the ability to put a little bit more on Cam Ward in this game, give him a little bit more to, I don't want to say stat pad, but I do want to say have a big-time game. I think it could be one of those moments where you look back and you just see one of those, if you remember, Jaden Daniels against Florida last year. It was a ridiculous game that kind of put his stamp on the Heisman. Could be this kind of moment for Cam Ward. Probably won't put his stamp on it and totally lock it up, but absolutely could put a really, really good place for him at the very top of that race. And then, as Anthony says here, the run game is going to be huge. Play action is going to be huge down the stretch of the season. So I understand you want to get Cam Ward the Heisman, and frankly, I'd love to see him go crazy in this game, but wouldn't be crazy to me at all if they just followed the same thing that they did in the Florida State game, where he doesn't have to be a superhero. He runs the ball, handles business, and then just keeps that Duke defense on the field like Anthony is saying. So definitely will be interesting to see their approach, but I'll be honest, I would love to see Cam Ward go for about 400 yards in this game, but we'll see what happens on that game. I think Tennessee-Kentucky is a really interesting one. We'll break it down in a little bit more detail on the Kentucky side here in a second, but I do think the obvious thing for Tennessee, connect on deep balls. You have Nico Iamaleava. You have a guy that can unleash the ball downfield, is one of the better, at least mechanically, is one of the better throwers in college football. He hit a deep ball to Dante Thornton. Is that the moment in that Bama game that totally flips the season for this offense? Or is it just kind of a one-off? Is it something that we saw one time and it's going to go back to being very frustrating when they throw the ball downfield? You have to find openings against a back end that is very, very real. It's going to be really, really interesting to watch that one unfold. And then I think the other thing is probably the obvious thing. Don't let them do what Arkansas did to you, because the reality was Arkansas just outmuscled Tennessee in that game. Their defense played incredibly well against that offensive line, and they totally shut down a lot of what Tennessee wanted to do. If Kentucky has the capability to do that physically, if they can, then it's going to be an absolute problem for just about anyone in this game. And then we got Texas A&M, South Carolina, a huge one. I am picking South Carolina to win this game. I am falling into the trap that a lot of people are falling into. But at the end of the day, I want to see what quarterback takes it. I need a quarterback to take it in this game, because I understand A&M fans saying play the quarterback that gives you a better chance to win week over week. I totally get that. I totally understand you have two very good quarterbacks here. The thing is, Texas is coming to town in a couple of weeks, and I can almost promise you, you're not winning that game if you're walking in not knowing who your starting quarterback is. You have to know who that guy is. Would love to see Marcel Reed or Connor Wegman just take this job, and maybe they're not fully able to on Saturday, but at least be able to do it over the next couple of weeks, because at some point, you're going to need a quarterback. You're going to need a guy that goes out there and leads your offense. So definitely something to watch there. And then the other thing, don't take your foot off the gas. If you have a lead in this game, go after them. Really, really tear them to pieces, and don't be the team that lets a lead go away against a South Carolina team where you should be able to win. If you walk in, score 14 quick points, maybe some of that complacency starts to kind of really get in and starts to kind of cause problems for this A&M team. If you can avoid that, then you're probably in pretty good shape. And then Anthony had a question here. He absolutely is. And I think it's one of those interesting questions about Cam Ward, because you watch him play football, and it's all really incredible. He makes all the plays you need him to make. Everything looks really, really great. There's also some things where you're sitting there thinking, how is he doing this? How is he making these plays? Because sometimes the footwork's a little bit off. Sometimes the mechanics are just a little bit inconsistent, or a little bit just not as crisp as you want him to be. The thing is, he continues making the plays. So there's a million different things to worry about with that A&M team, or with that Miami team, excuse me. There's a million different things to worry about down the road when they play those big-time opponents. But the reality is there's no real time to, I don't want to say to think about it, but when they play those big-time teams, that's really the only time you're going to be able to see that. So I understand worrying about that, and it's definitely something that hypothetically could cause you problems against a Clemson, against a Texas, against a Alabama. But I also think when you have a guy like Cam Ward, it's kind of just about trusting him, putting him out there and just saying, hey, we trust you to go make the plays. We know you're going to do some pretty crazy things. We know you're going to play this game a little bit unconventionally, but go make the plays that we need you to make. And I think that's probably just the best way that Miami has to go about business. We can worry about his mechanics, and I definitely am, but I think that's probably something you'll have to worry a little bit more about in the NFL, and probably not quite as much in college football, but definitely will be something to watch. Maybe they get into that Clemson game and it all kind of falls off the rails. And then you talked about Mike Elko, relatively conservative, is a guy that just kind of wants to handle their business, move on with the day. Could that cause them problems in South Carolina where they're running the ball, they're just running the ball in the second half, and then South Carolina starts to claw their way back in? That's what I'm worried about with this A&M team, because I understand wanting to just kind of gut out a win, and they have the run game to do that. Against a South Carolina front end that can cause a lot of problems, you might just want to keep your foot on their throat. So definitely something to watch. Maybe he's not the coach to do that, and maybe that's a problem for them, or maybe they're more than fine doing that, and they can take their foot off their throat and be totally fine the rest of the way. Definitely will be something to watch, and I think regardless, Mike Elko is going to have to find a way to handle the craziness that is South Carolina right about now. But let's take our last break here, and when we come back, we got to get into a couple other games. We just got to get into all the games we hadn't had a chance to get to throughout the week. We'll do a little bit of a whip around right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the top 10 teams and just what exactly do we need to see from them. I think for A&M, the biggest thing that I want to see is just keep up what you've been doing. Do what you did last week, be able to handle your business, not go into that game even a little bit worried, handle your business, continue on your way. But definitely one that I'm a little bit nervous about for the Aggies. But let's get into a little bit of a whip around here because we got a ton of games that are going to be going on this weekend, a ton that are a little bit more under the radar because of all the big marquee games, or at least that one big marquee game that is going to go on this weekend. So definitely a lot that I want to get to. And that Ole Miss-Arkansas game, we talked about it on the upset alert, and it's very, very interesting. It's one of those games where Ole Miss has every ability to win this game and relatively win it pretty comfortably. I think they have the players on the outside. I think they have the guys. Now, if Trey Harris doesn't go, then you might have an issue on your hands. But definitely something to watch here. I think they're one of those teams where the offense has been able to score pretty much every single first drive, and then they just kind of go stagnant. This is an Arkansas defense that can cause problems for you if you go stagnant, and the offense will take full advantage. Taylor Green is a very, very talented player, and him against this D-line is going to be very, very interesting to watch. But at the end of the day, I think there's an Arkansas team that is looking for another big win. They would get to them to 6-3 if they were able to win this game and put them in really good position to go 8-4 this season, and then Texas comes into Fayetteville, so you might not even lose that game. Maybe you go 9-3 and have a really remarkable season if you're Arkansas, but at the end of the day, it comes down to Taylor Green. He's going to have to be special in this game the same way he's been special a lot this year. I think he has the ability to make those special plays they need, and frankly, I think I think Arkansas is going to be able to win this game. I do think Ole Miss goes down in this one. I think there's a little bit of a look ahead to that Georgia game because they know how important it is. I think Arkansas takes care of them before that Georgia game and knocks them out of the CFP race. Then you got Air Force Army, a huge game for the Black Knights over there, and definitely a game where you're on your road to a Notre Dame game, possible undefeated season. You got to take care of the first leg of the Commanders-in-Chief Trophy. You got to make sure that you handle that business, move on, and then you're playing a team that you should be able to handle business against. This Air Force team is 1-6. They give up 329 yards on the ground to Navy. You should be able to beat this team up. And frankly, with Bryson Daly, he should be able to put up just ridiculous numbers in this game. Now, it is a rivalry game, always has a little bit more to it than you see on paper, but at the end of the day, I think Army takes care of business. I think they absolutely beat up this team, and I think that Navy game, they won 34-7 over Air Force. I think that looks relatively nice at the end of this one. I think Army just goes to work, frankly. And then you got Virginia Tech-Syracuse, a huge game over there in the ACC. One of the few teams that still mathematically has an ability to get to the CFP is Virginia Tech. Now, you got to win this one, and then you got to invite Clemson into Blacksburg. So you got plenty of work to do, but let's get through this week and then see where we are. I think the funny thing about this game is going to be the battle of styles. You have Kyle McCord in this passing offense for Syracuse. They are going to push the ball downfield. For Virginia Tech, it's Baishal Tuden, it's Kyron Drones, it's running the football, keeping the ball on the ground, and trying to find a way to get those couple of plays on the defensive side to get you a couple extra possessions. I think this is going to be a really fun battle. I think it's going to go back and forth. Syracuse has taken a lot of hits over the last couple of weeks, and frankly, I think it's probably too much. I really like this Syracuse team, but I think Virginia Tech gets the win. I think they set up a really fun game against Clemson this next weekend. Then you got Minnesota at Illinois, and this is a very interesting game because Minnesota's favored. Illinois is a 2-loss team that's only lost at Penn State and at Oregon, and somehow they're 3-point underdogs at home to Minnesota, but here we are. It could be that BYU-UCF line again, and I'm going to try not to fall for it, but I might just. I think Max Brosmer is coming off the best game of his year against Maryland, where he went up for over 300 yards, 4 scores on the week, played really, really good football. Thing is, this Illinois backend is an absolute problem. They are really, really good against the pass. Have only gotten exposed really against Oregon this year, and definitely is going to be very interesting to watch that battle go back and forth and see if Darius Taylor gets a little bit more involved in this offense than he was a week ago for Minnesota. So I think it's a really interesting game. I think Illinois is a very, very talented team. I think they're a lot more solid than they're probably getting credit for. I think they win this one. I think they make that Vegas line look just a little bit dumb with a win over Minnesota here. And then you got Vanderbilt. Auburn fans, the bad man is back. I hate to tell you, but Diego Pavia is coming back to the Plains, and he is not coming for a loss. Last year, he came in, went 201 passing, 3 touchdowns en route to a 31-10 win for New Mexico State over Auburn. It was one of the craziest games of last year. It was one of those games that I don't remotely understand even to this day. But at the end of the day, that quarterback's coming back into the fray. He's coming back to the Plains, and he is looking for another win. He's an underdog, again, to this team, and it'll be really interesting to watch this one unfold. Vanderbilt, coming off a tough loss to Texas. Auburn coming off a solid win to Kentucky. It's going to be a running battle. It's going to come down to who can win that. It's going to be fascinating to watch this one. I think this is a little bit of a fight. I think they run the ball. I think it's going to be a little bit low scoring. I think they really get after each other. I'm not betting against Diego Pavia. I'm not picking against him right now. I think they stay alive. I think they get bowl eligible, I believe, in this game and continue moving forward towards a very, very good season for Vanderbilt. So I understand Auburn's favored. I think that's another line that's a little bit off this week. Then we got Kansas State-Houston. We talked about this one in the Upset Alert segment yesterday, and I think it's a really fascinating one to watch because you got a Kansas State team that is starting to roll towards that Big 12 title. They're starting to play that football that we've expected them for them from a long time, and we talked about it with Iowa State. Same exact scenario with Kansas State. Go into that game as a 10-1 team, had every ability to win that one, go to the Big 12 title, and then go on to the CFP. That's the only real way you're going to be able to do this. And then for Houston, it's kind of just about pulling a rabbit out of a hat. It's not necessarily a game where you match up great. It's not necessarily a game where you're in a great position to win it. Now, you do have a quarterback in Donovan Smith, or in Zion Chris, got confused with those quarterbacks over at Houston. But if you do have a quarterback in Zion Chris that, if you can make a couple of plays with his legs, is going to be a problem, is absolutely someone that could create a little bit of an issue. And this Kansas State team, maybe if you push them just a little bit, they'll start to crack. Who knows what happens with this team when they get a little bit of adversity thrown in front of them. But I think it's going to be a really fun matchup between two really dynamic quarterbacks in Chris and as well as Avery Johnson. In reality, Houston's not winning this game. Unless Kansas State just outright hands it to them, I don't think Houston has the ability to win this game. So all due respect to the Cougars, I do think Kansas State gets this one done. I think they continue moving forward to that Big 12 title that is going to be a huge one to watch. It's definitely one of those games where that Iowa State-Kansas State game could be one of the most consequential games when it comes down to the CFP, down the stretch of this season. Definitely going to be huge, and Kansas State's just trying to get there unscathed, at least the rest of the way. Then you got USC-Washington. This is a game that I talked about a little bit yesterday, but both these teams are just outright desperate for a win. Both are 4-4 right now. They're watching the team they probably hate the most in that conference in Oregon roll their way to a Big Ten title and possible national title. They're looking for a way to just feel good about where they are. They're looking for to be that second team in the Big Ten that came on over from the Pac-12. So USC's defense has taken a ton of hits, and they have struggled in the past couple of weeks. They played a little bit better football against that Rutgers team, but Rutgers is a little bit easier to stop on offense than Washington is. So we'll see what happens here. I tend to believe we're going to get a little bit of a shootout in this game. I think they're going to get after each other just a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily one of those games where you have one team that just totally dominates one way or the other. I also don't think it's a game where you have 20 points on one side. I think it's going to be a little bit up and down, a little bit kind of attacking downfield. And you got two quarterbacks that are kind of on different parts of their career, where you have Miller Moss trying to get his way in college football, trying to become one of those stars. Will Rogers, deep into his career, very, very confident in what he can do, and definitely in a place where he feels very good about where he is in Washington and possibly even going forward. And could this be a statement game possibly in the NFL draft? Obviously something that I'm not necessarily betting on, but if he goes out there and performs the next couple of weeks, then maybe some people start calling. But overall, I think this is one of those things that comes down to stuff off the field. I think these are two teams that are relatively evenly matched. I don't necessarily think there's a huge edge one way or the other. I'm going to go with Washington because they have the atmosphere in their favor. They have the veteran quarterback. I think USC is in a really weird spot, and I don't necessarily think it's going to equate into wins. So I think they put USC in a little bit of dire straits here, and Washington gets a win that they very badly need right about now. And then the game that we talked about just a second ago with Tennessee, now let's get into the other side just a little bit because this Kentucky team is just looking for a win. They're looking for that moment this season because they got it against Ole Miss earlier in the year. This would be another chance against a team that is going to play better defense than Ole Miss, but at the end of the day, does have the ability where if you stop this run game, if you're able to slow down Dylan Sampson, which is a tall order, but if you're able to do that, there's a world where this Tennessee offense just goes totally flat. You have the ability to possibly just shut this entire thing down, and it'll be interesting to see just how Josh Heupel approaches this game in the first place, because the reality is the pass game has not necessarily been there, especially downfield. Does he just say we're going to run the ball, play defense, and get out with a win? Because they likely could in this game if they wanted to follow that formula. Thing is, you're going to need those big plays down the stretch. So in this game, is he going to let it fly? Is he going to try to get that going? Or is it going to be a little bit more ground and pound, just get out with a win and move on to a big-time game with Georgia in a couple of weeks? They do have Mississippi State before, but let's be totally honest, that's probably a win. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be a really interesting game where Kentucky's a tough team. They're one that can absolutely push a team like Tennessee to the brink and possibly cause some problems for them. Thing is, I just think there's going to be too many big plays. I do think Nico has kind of turned a corner after that big play against Alabama. I think he's going to hit at least a couple in this game, and I think Tennessee probably pulls away, probably wins by 14 points in this one. I don't necessarily love this Kentucky team, but I do think they have a defense to keep it close for a half, 3/4 maybe, and then Tennessee makes the plays down the stretch of this game. So it's going to be interesting to watch this week unfold. It's one of those weeks where you have that marquee matchup in Happy Valley, and then you got a ton of other games. You know, you have Pitt, SMU, you have a couple others that are going to be big time. They're not necessarily like a myriad of big time games all over the place. So it's going to be one of those weeks where a lot of stuff could go wrong for a lot of teams. It's just one of those things that happens in college football, and definitely will be something that I'm watching very, very closely this upcoming weekend. But we'll be back tomorrow. We'll break down all of the hypotheticals like we were talking about earlier, Anthony. We'll break down pretty much everything else that you need to know around this upcoming week in college football. But thank you once again for tuning into the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could possibly want. So definitely come and tune into GSMC. We have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow to tie us from loose ends for this week 10.